Hitting $1 million invested might seem like just a number, but in reality, it's a huge shift in the way you think about money. Before this moment, you're mostly focused on saving, building, and pushing through. But after you cross that $1 million mark, something changes. Now, your money starts working harder than you ever did. You stop feeling the need to constantly hustle. It's like hitting a sweet spot where things begin to flow. Now, the real question is, how do you continue this momentum? When you're just starting out, every dollar you invest feels like it hardly makes a difference. You're putting money in, but it feels small, like it barely moves a needle. But the moment you hit $1 million invested, things start to feel different. Your existing money, not just new contributions, is doing the heavy lifting for you, and that shift is empowering. You can finally feel the power of compounding. Now, your investment has momentum. Every dollar is working harder than the last. This is where the magic of compounding truly kicks in. Before $1 million, it seems like your growth is slow. You might check your portfolio, and it's just not exciting. It feels like there's no progress. But after you've hit the $1 million mark, something clicks. Suddenly, your investments start growing at a faster pace. Sometimes, even without adding new money. It's like the work you've done finally starts to pay off, and you begin seeing real, significant movement in your accounts. That's when you realize it's not about your effort anymore. It's about the power of momentum, and that momentum can lead to some serious wealth-building opportunities. One of the key changes when you hit $1 million invested is how you start to view risk. At the beginning of your financial journey, every decision feels critical. Every investment feels like a high-risk move, and you can't afford mistakes. But after hitting $1 million invested, you gain more space to breathe. You have more room to think long-term and avoid the anxiety of making impulsive decisions. You start to appreciate a steady, calculated approach to growing your wealth. At the start, it's all about earning more, getting a raise, finding side gigs, working harder. You're laser-focused on increasing your income so you can save more. But after hitting $1 million invested, the game changes. Now your focus shifts. You realize that investments become your primary source of wealth growth. The pressure to keep earning actively subsides as your portfolio begins generating passive income. Your mindset starts to focus on growing rather than just earning. Once you've hit $1 million invested, the way you make decisions also starts to evolve. Before, you might have been scrambling to find quick wins, constantly seeking short-term results. But after you've crossed this threshold, your mindset shifts. Now you focus on long-term thinking, strategies that take years to fully pay off. You start to see the bigger picture, making decisions not just for today, but for decades ahead. This long-term perspective is where real wealth is built. Hitting $1 million invested brings with it a major psychological shift. Before you cross this line, money feels like a constant struggle. It's not that you don't want to save. It's that you don't yet have that solid foundation. But once you hit that $1 million mark, something profound happens. You don't feel the need to prove yourself anymore. You're no longer stressed by the day-to-day hustle. The grind gets easier. You've built something substantial. And most importantly, you realize this isn't a fluke. It's sustainable. That security boosts your confidence and changes the way you interact with money from now on. As you build wealth, you start to realize that opportunities become less urgent. In the early days, you chase every opportunity that comes your way because you're trying to catch up. But once you hit $1 million, you're no longer just trying to survive. You're choosing opportunities with a lot more precision, and you're no longer chasing every shiny object that promises fast returns. You become more selective, focusing on what actually moves the needle long term. You no longer need to hustle. Now, you're building strategically. After hitting $1 million invested, you also develop a much stronger sense of patience. In the beginning, you want to see fast results. You want your hard work to pay off immediately. But once you build up a solid base, you realize that real wealth doesn't come from fast wins. It comes from being patient, watching your investments grow steadily over time, not rushing things. Patience becomes a valuable asset, and this mindset protects you from making short-sighted decisions. As your wealth grows, so does your relationship with money. At the beginning, money is something you're always chasing, trying to earn, save, and invest more. But once you reach $1 million invested, you realize that the game changes. Your focus shifts from simply acquiring money to making intentional, purposeful decisions. Spending becomes less about instant gratification and more about strategic choices that align with your long-term goals. When you've hit $1 million invested, you begin to value the preservation of your wealth just as much as growing it. You understand that after this point, protecting what you've built is as important as continuing to grow. You stop taking excessive risks. You focus on diversification and minimizing downside risk. Your wealth becomes not just a tool for growth, but a legacy you intend to protect for future generations. Mistakes after reaching $1 million don't feel as crushing as they used to. Before, a single mistake might have wiped out months of savings or investments. But now you have a buffer, a cushion that helps you recover quickly. This sense of security doesn't make you reckless. It actually makes you more thoughtful. You're not afraid to make bold moves anymore, but you approach them with careful consideration. And that confidence is what allows you to keep growing even faster. After hitting $1 million invested, you begin to view your wealth as a tool for freedom. It's no longer just about numbers on a screen. It's about having more control over your time. The money you built gives you choices. Choices you didn't have when you were hustling for every dollar. You can now afford time to pursue the things that truly matter, like spending time with family, working on passion projects, or simply enjoying life. At this level, you've gained more control over your decisions than ever before. You can decide how you want to live your life and where your money will go. Money is no longer something you work for. Now you work with money. Your investments now work for you, creating income streams and growing your wealth passively. You've shifted from being a laborer. So when you finally hit $1 million invested, it's not just a financial milestone. It's a complete shift in how your life starts to feel. There's less pressure to constantly chase money, less urgency in every decision you make, and more clarity about what actually matters. Because now, you're no longer trying to build from scratch. You've already built something real, something that can grow on its own. And that's the key difference. At this point, you're not just working for money anymore. Your money is working for you, consistently, quietly, and in the background. And once you experience that shift, you realize this isn't the finish line. It's the beginning of a completely different level. After reaching 1 million invested, you start thinking less about survival and more about optimization. Earlier, it was about getting there. Now it's about doing things better. You begin asking smarter questions. How can I make this more efficient? How can I reduce risk while still growing? And that shift moves you from effort to strategy. You also stop comparing yourself as much. At the beginning, you constantly look at others. Who's earning more? Who's investing better? But once you've built something real, that noise fades. You focus on your own path, your own system, and that clarity helps you grow faster. Another big change is how you handle market fluctuations. Before hitting $1 million, every drop feels scary. You see red, and it creates doubt. You question your decisions. You feel like you might lose everything. But after building a larger portfolio, your perspective changes. You've seen ups and downs before. You understand that volatility is normal. And instead of reacting emotionally, you stay calm. You stick to your strategy. Because now you trust the process. And that trust is what protects your wealth long term. At this level, you also start thinking in systems, not actions. Earlier, every move felt important. Every decision felt separate. But now, you build systems that handle decisions for you. Automatic investing, clear rules, defined strategies, and that removes stress. You begin to value simplicity because you realize complex doesn't always mean better. In fact, simple strategies often perform more consistently. So instead of chasing complicated ideas, you focus on what works, and you repeat it again and again. Another shift is how you define success. At the beginning, it's all about hitting numbers. But now, success becomes more about control. Control over your time, your choices, your lifestyle, because money was never the end goal. It was always a tool. You also become more protective of your time because now you understand time is more valuable than money. Money can grow, time cannot. So you start saying no more often. You prioritize better, and that changes your life quality. At this stage, you stop reacting to short-term noise completely. News, trends, market hype, it all becomes less important because you've seen how temporary it is. You've learned that reacting too quickly often leads to mistakes. So instead, you slow down, you think, you evaluate, and you act with intention. And that shift keeps your progress stable. While others move emotionally, you move strategically. Another change is your confidence becomes quieter. You don't feel the need to prove anything. You don't talk about money as much because now you know what you've built. And that internal confidence is stronger than external validation. You also become more patient with growth because you've seen how long it takes and how powerful it becomes over time. So instead of rushing results, you allow things to develop naturally. And that patience keeps your strategy strong. At this level, you start thinking about sustainability, not just growth. You ask, can this continue long term? Is this stable? And that mindset protects you from making risky decisions. You also realize something important. More money doesn't solve everything. It solves financial problems, but it doesn't automatically create happiness. And that realization changes your focus. You start investing in your life, not just your portfolio, your health, your time, your relationships, because at this stage, you understand balance. And that balance is what makes wealth meaningful. You also become more selective with risk. You don't chase big wins anymore. You protect what you've built, and you grow it steadily, because consistency is more important than speed. Another shift is you stop seeking shortcuts, because you've seen what actually works. And it's not shortcuts, it's consistency. So you stay disciplined, you stay focused, and you trust the process. At this point, your financial decisions become calmer, less emotional, less reactive, more intentional. And that clarity reduces mistakes because now you're not guessing, you're deciding. You also understand opportunity costs better. Every decision has a trade-off. Every dollar has a direction. And that awareness helps you make smarter choices because you're thinking beyond the moment. At this level, you start simplifying your life, not complicating it, because you realize clarity leads to better decisions, and simplicity makes everything easier to manage. Another shift is you become less reactive to income changes because your investments support you. So even if income fluctuates, you stay stable, and that stability creates confidence. You also begin thinking about legacy, not just personal success, but long-term impact, what you leave behind, how your wealth continues. And that perspective changes your decisions because now you're not just building for yourself, you're building for something bigger, and that creates purpose. So by this stage, everything feels different, not easier in effort, but easier in clarity. You understand the game now. You've built systems, you've built discipline, and most importantly, you've built control. And that's what changes everything. At this level, you start thinking differently about freedom, not just financial freedom, but mental freedom, because now you're not constantly worried about money. You're not reacting to every expense. And that space allows you to think bigger, to plan differently, to live more intentionally. You also become less influenced by external pressure, trends, opinions, social expectations. They start to matter less because now your decisions are based on your system, not someone else's life. And that independence is powerful. Another major shift is how you handle uncertainty. Before building wealth, uncertainty feels dangerous. It creates fear. It forces quick decisions. But after reaching this level, uncertainty becomes manageable because you have a foundation, you have reserves, you have experience, And instead of reacting emotionally, you adapt, you adjust, you stay calm. And that ability to remain steady in uncertainty is what separates long-term wealth builders from everyone else. At this stage, you also realize something simple. You don't need more complexity. You need consistency because you've seen it work over and over again. And that clarity keeps your strategy focused. You also stop chasing validation. Earlier, progress needed to be visible, recognized, appreciated. But now, you move quietly because you understand real progress doesn't need attention. It needs consistency. Another important shift is how you measure progress. Before, you measured growth in dollars. Now, you measure it in stability, in control, in flexibility. Because money is just one part, but control over your life, that's the real outcome. And once you see that clearly, your priorities change. You stop chasing more for the sake of more and start focusing on what actually improves your life. You also become more intentional with your environment, who you spend time with, what you focus on, what influences your decisions, because you realize environment shapes behavior and behavior shapes outcomes. At this level, you stop reacting to short-term losses because you understand the bigger picture. You've seen growth over time. You've experienced recovery. So instead of panic, you stay steady. And that steadiness protects your long-term results. Another shift is how you see opportunity. Before, every opportunity felt urgent, like you had to act quickly. But now, you understand not every opportunity is worth taking. You evaluate more carefully. You wait when needed, and you act only when it aligns with your strategy. And that patience protects your focus, because sometimes the best decision is to do nothing. You also start appreciating simplicity in life, not just in money, but in everything. Less noise, less distraction, more clarity, because you've learned complexity creates stress, but simplicity creates control. At this point, you begin trusting yourself more, your decisions, your process, your strategy, because you've seen results. And that trust reduces hesitation. It allows you to move forward with confidence. You also realize something deeper. Money amplifies who you already are. It doesn't change you. It reveals you. So if you've built discipline, it grows. If you've built control, it strengthens. And that's why the journey matters. Because the habits you build early are the ones that define your future. And once you understand that, you focus more on who you're becoming, not just what you're earning. Another shift is you stop rushing outcomes. Because you trust time, you've seen what patience can do. So instead of forcing results, you allow them to happen. And that patience keeps your progress stable. At this stage, you realize wealth is quiet. It doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be shown. Because real wealth is about freedom, not attention. And that mindset keeps you grounded. So when everything changes after hitting 1 million invested, it's not because of the number itself. It's because of the person you became to reach it. The discipline, the patience, the awareness, the control. That's what creates the shift. Because once you've built all of that, money becomes easier to manage. Growth becomes easier to maintain. And life becomes clearer to navigate. So the real milestone was never the million. It was the transformation that got you there.